Welcome to the Great Basin seasonal outlook for November through February. Currently, we have quite a bit of prescribed burning occurring across the Great Basin, especially up in central Idaho and down into northern Utah, with a few projects scattered around southern and western areas. Otherwise, we've had no significant new wildfires recently across the Great Basin aside from some initial attack. Great Basin and Nick are both at PL1. Over the last 7 to 14 days, any precipitation that's moved across the Great Basin has mainly targeted the northern half of the region, with some areas seeing above normal precipitation across northern Nevada, southern Idaho, and even into eastern Idaho and northern Utah. The southern half of the Great Basin continues to see very little precipitation, and anything we have seen has generally been near normal, but most areas have been dry and well below normal precipitation. Looking at the temperature and precipitation for the entire month of October, we've seen generally cooler than normal temperatures over the western half of the Great Basin, along with well above normal precipitation in many areas. The only exceptions are parts of the Arizona Strip into southern Nevada that have seen below normal precipitation. Any of this precipitation over the southern half of Utah was occurring during the first half of October. Along with the above normal precipitation we've seen across the Great Basin, we have seen colder temperatures dropping snow levels, and our snowpack is currently well above normal for the time of year, especially across Idaho and Wyoming, down into northern Nevada and northern Utah. Even though we don't typically have a lot of snow at this time of year, so amount-wise it doesn't add up to too much. However, it is well above normal for what we would normally see throughout October. Looking at the drought conditions, we still have drought conditions across much of the Great Basin, with the exception of western and northern Nevada and southwest Idaho, which are the only areas absent of drought. However, the rest of the area, we're seeing a generally severe to extreme drought over the southern half of the Great Basin, and generally moderate to severe drought further north. Looking at the drought outlook through the end of January, most areas over the southern half of the region, which are expected to be on the drier side of the weather going through the winter, we'll see the drought either persist or intensify, and we are expecting some improvement over northern areas as we continue to get storms to move across the north, bringing precipitation and new snowpack. So looking at our current fuel conditions, the one thing that will be carried over from the fire season through the off season in the fall and winter will be the fine fuel loading. All of that fine fuel that we had on the ground is now going to be transitioning into dormancy as we go towards winter, and will still be around and will be a main concern after prolonged dry periods, especially on windy days. So these areas over southern Idaho into parts of northern Nevada and even small parts of northern Utah, that will be the focus going forward. If we do have any strong wind events after a prolonged dry period, we could see an uptick of initial attack and fire potential if we have starts in those areas. Otherwise, looking at our live sagebrush fuel moisture across the Great Basin, really all areas are seeing near to above fuel moisture for the time of year. We have had storms and cooler temperatures move through much of especially the latter half of October, but also in some areas further south. So again, we are seeing those conditions moderate. Looking at some of our dead fuel moistures, the 100-hour fuel moistures have been trending near average in many areas of these two charts. The top right is for the Payette, and the bottom right is for western Wyoming. You can see the fuel moistures, however, will be trending down as we head into the early part of November, just with drier conditions expected. So we could see some of that fluctuation continue where we see these storms move through and increase the fuel moisture, and then we see the drier periods where they drop. But for the most part, we'll likely be trending near average as we go into the winter months. Looking at our fuel moistures over western Nevada and northern Utah, we are seeing fuel moistures generally near normal in many of these areas, but again, we are expecting some drier conditions heading into November, so we will see those fuel moistures drop. And in some areas, even in the northern Wasatch, we could see these fuel moistures near record lows for the time of year. This is obviously well higher than what we would see for critical for the fire season, but it is notable that it is very low for the time of year. And we do have quite a bit of prescribed burning occurring in northern Utah and also in the Payette and some of those drier spots. So putting everything together and looking at what we are expecting for the next 4 months for the forecast, for the 8 to 14-day outlook taking us through the first part of November, we are expecting warm conditions and dry conditions in the south, with generally above normal precipitation at times over northern and far western areas. But really this looks to be more normal or even just above normal with some of the heavier precipitation in the Pacific Northwest. If we look at the entire month forecast from the Climate Prediction Center, it's trending towards above normal temperatures and any potential of above normal precipitation occurring across the northern tier. And looking at the 3-month forecast from December through February, kind of that similar trend with the above normal precipitation really tied to the northern portion of the Great Basin, but there is a greater likelihood of below normal temperatures dropping down. And I'll show some other maps that indicate that this could even be a little bit more widespread. However, in the south or the southern half of the Great Basin, we're likely going to see more, at least of the drier scenario, and it's kind of questionable whether we see above or below normal temperatures. Looking at some analog years that look very similar to the year we are currently in and the period we're heading towards going through the winter months, the one thing that really stands out is the better likelihood of below normal temperatures across much of the West going into January and February. So this may or may not translate to also precipitation, but it could be cold and dry over the southern half of the Great Basin and a little bit wetter up north. So definitely something to watch as we go into the winter months, as it could be a colder period as we get into January and February. So tying everything together for this time of year, for November through February, we are expecting normal fire potential, which generally would be low fire activity across the Great Basin. The only caveat would be in those areas of above normal fine fuel growth over southern Idaho and northern Nevada, and even pieces of northern Utah and small pieces of western Nevada. Those areas, as those fuels were dry coming out of the fire season and will transition into dormancy, we will be watching those areas for any strong wind events after prolonged dry periods before we have snowfall on the ground. Hopefully, once we get into November or January and February, we will be outside of that window and we will see some colder storms moving in. But again, that will be the main focus going through the winter months. That concludes the webcast for this month. Check back next month for the latest updates.